These days, it seems to take at least two hands to get into a bottle of medication. They're sealed, or you have to press down and twist, or you have to push down a lever and twist. Either way, it takes a certain amount of dexterity to open. But that hasn't always been the case. Medicine, especially over-the-counter medicine, used to be sold with just a flip-top cap and no seal. The case we're going over today is the reason medication companies made the swap to tamper-proof seals, and for a very good reason. Welcome to another intriguing episode of All Things Mysterious, the podcast where all the realms of true crime, supernatural, and the unexplained converge. I'm your host, Jordan.
I'm Matt.
We're ready to plunge into today's fascinating mysteries. Let's dive right in. On September 29, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up not feeling well. So her parents gave her one Tylenol extra-strength pill in hopes that it would help ease the aches and pains. She planned to go lay down, but didn't even make it to her room. Her parents heard a thud, and when they investigated, found Mary unconscious and convulsing on the bathroom floor. She was brain dead by the time she got to the hospital. They did try to save her, but she was pronounced dead at 9:56 a.m. Due to the odd nature of her death, police did take all of the medication, including the Tylenol, from the medicine cabinet to look over, and her parents agreed to an autopsy. Originally, it was thought that she had died from a heart attack, but seeing as she was only 12 years old, the medical examiner wanted to look further. Unfortunately, more people would take Tylenol before the medical examiner would find the answer.
I'm going to be honest here. I really hate Jordan for this one because this is the case that I really wanted to cover and she stole it from me.
I beat you to it.
No, but seriously, I really enjoy this case. It's such a good case. And it's the one time I think in history that a company's actually done the right thing.
In truth, you're 100% right, because in how many times in history have you really seen a company act? Obviously, we haven't gotten to this point yet, but later in the episode, you'll see exactly how the company responds.
Mhm.
And I think we can all agree that they handled it better than anybody else in history probably could have responded.
And to be fair, if you listened to our previous episode, you would have heard us talk about this.
I don't think you did. I don't remember. It's weird listening to our own voices, so we don't listen to a whole lot of it.
I listened to it enough while I'm editing it that it's hard for me to listen to it after it's uploaded. But either way, it's a really good story. If you haven't heard it, you're in for a treat. And if you have, you're still in for a treat.
For sure. The same day, on September 29th, as Mary's death, Adam Janis woke up with a cold, just about the same as Mary. He had picked up his kids from preschool, came home, and took 2 Tylenol extra strength. And then his wife found him convulsing on the floor, just the same as Mary, around 1:30 p.m. She called 911, but again, he was pronounced dead by 3:15 p.m. But unfortunately, this was not all for the Janis family. After his death, his family went back to their house to mourn, and due to the mourning, they all started to get headaches. Both Adam's brother, Stanley, and Stanley's new wife, Teresa, took the Tylenol they found sitting on the table, and you know where it goes from there. Stanley passed out, shortly followed by Teresa. Stanley was pronounced dead at 8:15 p.m., but doctors were able to keep Teresa on life support for 3 days before ultimately she also passed away. The important part here is that they were all taken to the same hospital, which is where doctors and nurses began digging into what could have caused this reaction, realizing that most likely they had all been poisoned. The hospital, never having dealt with something like this before, made some calls and ran tests, as well as asked the remaining family what everyone who had died shared contact with. That list was as follows: home jarred goods such as cherries, cherry juice, and blueberries, one coffee pot containing black coffee, one plastic bag containing pound cake, and medication. The medication, of course, being Tylenol. Meanwhile, the tests came back from the hospital, and it turns out all the victims had high levels of cyanide in their blood and had died from cyanide poisoning.
It really sucks for the Janus family, losing 3 people in one day.
If they hadn't, I don't think they would have caught on to what was happening.
That's what I was about to say. That directly resulted in them figuring out what was going on. They figured out it was cyanide, but it wasn't until the Janus family that they started putting the pieces together and realized that it was in the Tylenol. Eventually, they would have came to the same conclusion, I think, but it probably would have been days or even weeks.
Imagine how many more lives would have been taken
Mhm.
because days later, they found more contaminated
Yeah.
Tylenol. Imagine how many more people that could have affected.
Oh, yeah. I know that they only found a few bottles that were contaminated on the shelves, but that still would have been more people that could have died.
Well, like you saw, it's not like just one person in each household takes the Tylenol. There are families in these homes. It's Tylenol. You've got a headache, a cold,
Mhm.
joint pain, Tylenol. You're not thinking twice about it because it's Tylenol.
And that's the really scary part. It wasn't every pill that was contaminated. It was only a few of them. So you could have took half the bottle, been perfectly fine, and then take another pill and die from cyanide poisoning.
So you have no idea how long this could have gone on.
I know a lot of people just threw out their Tylenol, but how many bottles had contaminated pills?
We have no idea.
Most people just threw them out. They didn't actually send them back into the company. I know some people turned them into police for them to test. But again, the problem with testing it, they're going to test maybe 1 or 2 pills usually.
Right. Just think of the logistics behind testing thousands of bottles and individual pills within those bottles.
Most bottles have 100 pills.
Somewhere in there,
I don't know if they differed back in the day, but most bottles these days are like 100, 250, and then 500 or something like that.
I'd think they'd have 50 in there.
But it sucks for the Janus family. Honestly, those 3 deaths saved a lot of lives. Not the way that you want to be a hero, though.
Absolutely not, but they did. But those were not the only deaths. There were 7 in total, all on or around September 29th. Mary McFarland, 31 years old, got a headache at work, took some extra strength Tylenol, passed out at work, and passed away overnight at the hospital. Mary Rayner, 27 years old, was a mother of 4, just got home from the hospital with her 4th child, took Tylenol, and her husband found her passed out on the floor. She passed away the next morning despite life-saving efforts. This one hurts me the most. Paula Prince was 35 and never got a chance because she took Tylenol at home alone and there was no one there to call 911 for her. She was found on October 1st by police via a welfare check after missing a reservation. Now, thankfully, a nurse named Helen Jensen was the one to put 2 and 2 together and realized that Tylenol was the common factor of all these deaths. And she also was the one to call Tylenol headquarters and notify them of the problem.
I always wondered back when I was single before I had kids, what would happen if I would just die alone in my apartment?
Eventually, somebody does miss you. In our case, it probably would be work.
Like,
Where are you? Why are you not coming in?
we know our boss will send cops to our house.
Regardless, eventually someone would find us.
Eventually, yeah, someone's going to find you. But how long is it going to take? There's been documented cases where people have died in their home and it's been weeks or even months before they were discovered. That's why I had kids.
I know for a fact that somebody would definitely be missing me. And honestly, it probably would be my mom before my boyfriend because my mom freaks out if I don't answer her. She freaks out. The day after I got diagnosed with my neurological condition, I'd been given new medicine and I had no idea that it was going to affect me in a way that would just knock me out. I had been awake and at the hospital for 17, 18 hours. So I was exhausted. I'd had a spinal tap done, all sorts of testing. I was so tired. I got home, I took this medicine, and it literally knocked me out. And I slept almost 24 hours. I had no idea it was going to affect that way. The next thing I know, my mom has my boyfriend knocking on my bedroom window to wake me up, which is barely a step away from calling the cops. So I know for a fact that somebody would be missing me.
That was also the day that you were like 3 hours late to work.
I was off that day.
It was one of those days you were 3 hours late.
Yeah, that was a couple days later. I had no idea that the medicine was gonna hit me that hard. It took a lot of adjusting, and I'm really happy that we switched medicines because that medicine just killed me. It was horrible.
That was the first thing I thought of. Second thing I thought of was kudos to that nurse, putting it all together. Third thing, I assume we're about to get into the good part.
We're getting there.
Anybody who owns a major corporation needs to listen to this next part because this is how you respond.
Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, did not take this lightly. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, they did every single thing right. They held a press conference on the morning of September 30th, and by 9 a.m., they had sent out a recall on the lot number from Mary Kellerman and the Janice's home, not realizing yet that it wasn't contaminated by lot number. People panicked, flooding emergency rooms, calling poison control, calling the police. But Johnson & Johnson did the right thing. They instead recalled every single bottle. They sent out advertisements, actual advertisements, to not take their product, and instead offered a reward to anyone who had information on the person who poisoned the bottles. Tylenol was completely off the shelf, and now it was up to the police to figure out who did it.
Again, kudos to Tylenol. I think it's probably the one time in history that we can say company did the right thing.
They weren't worried about the money. They
Right.
just wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah, and they end up losing millions of dollars, not just in the short term. It took years for them to get back to where they are now. They knew going into it that they were going to lose business.
They knew they would gain more trust by doing it the right way and changing their business practice, which
Percent.
is just above and beyond.
Yeah, it really is. And a lot of people don't realize, and hopefully, I don't know if you touch on this later on, but
I do.
okay. I'll wait to comment on that then. But this is how you respond. You're going to lose money, obviously. They lost millions of dollars. I think I'd heard it's like somewhere close to $200 million.
At least.
They lost their market share too. Because at the time,
It went down to 7%.
at one point, they were leading. They were at 34, 30 some percent or something, which was at the top out of all the different brands. But yeah, they lost a lot of money, but they still did everything the right way. It's unheard of for a company to send out advertisements telling people not to use their product and to throw it away.
I know, but man, I'm still so impressed. I've heard this case several times, but I still get goosebumps because they were concerned enough about the actual people taking their product instead of their self. And it's just unheard of because for once in a lifetime, a company cared more about their people than themselves. And that's what they need to do because when I tell you guys more about this later, you'll understand why they got all the trust back that they have now.
Oh yeah, they changed the industry. And that's the other thing is from what I understand, it wasn't just a regional recall. They did a nationwide everywhere they sold Tylenol. They couldn't be sure. At this point, they didn't know how it was contaminated. They didn't know if it was contaminated in their warehouse or in their manufacturing process.
So originally, they thought that it was only one lot number
Mhm.
because the same lot number was on Mary's and the Janice's home's bottle. But when they started looking further, the other three victims had different lot numbers on theirs. So they had no idea exactly how it was contaminated. And once they realized that, they were like, at this point, it's safer to just all of it. All of it needs to go.
It's awesome. They were offering refunds for any product that people bought and had to dispose. They were on the forefront of getting people not to take this product until they could make sure it was safe. They were even offering to give them brand new bottles that were just manufactured.
Yeah, they were so on top of things ahead of the time. Unreal how well they handled the situation.
I can guarantee that would not happen today. Like, I guarantee most any company would instantly go into defense and not admit anything and not do anything to prevent it. Look at how many times products contaminated with salmonella.
Oh, yeah. The first thing they do is this batch number, and you should be okay.
Pretty much any recall these days are forced by the FDA. I think this is probably the one time in history where the company actually initiated the recall, going further than what the government would force them to do. And it's just awesome.
So, when looking for suspects, the police first looked for angry employees, but they found out quickly that it did not actually come from the factory. Instead, the person put cyanide laced pills into different bottles at different store locations to just wreak havoc. A letter was then sent to Johnson & Johnson, threatening to repeat the murders if not given $1 million. Johnson & Johnson then sent the letter to the FBI, who figured out it came from a man named James Lewis. Many people still believe that James did the murders. However, James was nowhere near Chicago at the time and could not have been the person to put the poisoned pills out.
Oh, this guy is great. He's probably one of my all-time favorite suspects in any kind of murder mystery like this because, for one, the letter included a bank routing number and an account number, which led to another account
He was trying to frame him.
because the guy owed his wife money,
It was so small.
like $50.
Yeah, it was nowhere near $1 million.
He wanted to get on his wife's good side. So he sends this letter trying to frame this guy, not thinking about the fingerprints that he leaves on the letter.
And then he goes to prison for 20 years.
Honestly, that guy should not have went to prison. He's great.
He
The
only
sm-
served 13
yeah,
years, but come on, man.
not the smartest guy in the world, but that's not the same guy that wrote the book, is it?
I don't think so.
This guy actually wrote a book.
I don't know anything about writing a book.
When he went to promote his book, all people wanted to talk about was his connection to the Tylenol murders.
Oh my God.
So I just had to look it up.
Matt is right and I am wrong.
So James Lewis released a book called Poison, The Doctor's Dilemma. The book centers around the deaths of people in rural Missouri from lead poisoning. But he says that the book is totally fictional. He also includes a line in there about the Tylenol cases saying some nut spiked Tylenol capsules with cyanide in 1982.
Oh my God. How did I miss this?
This is like my favorite part, but he sent an email to the Tribune saying, quote, my novel mentioned hundreds of historical incidents simply to establish an historical setting.
This man is straight up insane.
Yeah, man, I knew I remember that piece, but I couldn't remember if it was the same guy or not. I just had to look it up.
I'm glad you did.
So yeah, one and the same guy. This guy is great. Obviously not very
Right.
smart, but God, now I want to buy that book just to read it.
Probably should buy it and read it.
Coming up, a book review of Poison.
I'll do it.
We're gonna do a special episode coming up. We're gonna read the book and we're gonna go over it.
I will look it up right now.
I just remember every time he would try to promote this book, that's all anybody would talk about was the Tylenol murders.
This guy. Wow. Well, our second suspect is equally as bright. His name is Roger Arnold, and he thought it was a good idea to tell people at a bar that he was responsible for the Tylenol killings while waving a bag of white powder. Naturally, the bartender called the police, and police searched his home. They didn't find much. They found, I believe, a rifle, but he did live across the street from where one of the laced bottles was bought, and he had a book called The Poor Man's James Bond, which had instructions on how to make cyanide. However, no actual cyanide nor other evidence was actually found. But after many years, they reopened the case with DNA testing. At this point, Roger Arnold had already passed away, so they dug him up and tested his DNA against the DNA on the tampered bottles. It did not match.
This guy, besides the fact that he had how-to crime books in his bedroom, he was a convicted killer.
Yes,
I'm sad that you didn't include that.
I believe it happened after this. It happened afterward.
It was actually, he went back to the bar later on and ended up beating or killing the guy who he thought turned him into the police.
That's why I didn't include it, because it happened afterward. I didn't feel like it tested to who he was before when he would have done the Tylenol stuff.
To me, it shows a pattern because he's obviously capable of murder.
I feel like beating somebody to death is completely different than poisoning.
It is. To me, the whole Tylenol thing is impersonal. You can't really choose who buys the pills. You can't actually watch them die. It's like throwing the poison in there and then throwing it in the universe and seeing what happens. Definitely a lot more impersonal than beating someone to death. But this guy is great. Not great because he murdered someone, but
Great in a wow, dude kind of way.
Ye
Why'd you go to a bar and be like, "Look, I have cyanide"? Why?
and then get mad because someone turns you into the police. Seriously.
What do you think was going to happen?
But, yeah, so we've talked about this before. The DNA that they found isn't necessarily the killer's. A lot of people handled those bottles afterwards.
Oh, a ton. They come from a factory, they come from shipments, they go through the store. Tons of people handle them within the actual store. Who knows?
Yeah. So to me, the DNA on the bottles is not very good evidence just because we've talked about it before, did a whole episode on it. Things can get contaminated, especially things like this where it's not necessarily meant to be sterile.
Yeah, especially back then. I wonder if they found DNA somewhere you wouldn't find it, like on the inside of the cap or something.
Those bottles are manufactured. A lot of people probably touch them before they get to you. It could have been someone who was part of the manufacturing process.
Exactly, because we don't know.
The fact that his DNA didn't match doesn't rule him out as the suspect. I think this guy is too dumb to be the actual suspect.
That's my opinion on it as well. I don't think he was mentally capable of putting it all together.
This kind of crime doesn't really scream mastermind to me.
It doesn't, but he would have to know the lifespan of cyanide, and he would have to have the thought process and the wherewithal to put them all in different places and at least plan that part out.
Yeah, but I buy bottles of Tylenol, Advil a lot, and it could be a couple weeks before I ever even open it.
That's true.
So it's a gamble the way he did it.
Could be lucky. The third and final suspect may surprise you. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, was thought to be involved literally because his parents owned a home in the area. And of course, Ted denied anything to do with it. Little bit of a stretch.
I have more on this one.
I'll let you have at it.
So I can't remember the state. It was like Wyoming or one of those states over there. There was actually another murder, cyanide-laced Tylenol. It was never officially connected to the Chicago Tylenol murders. They suspected that it was a trial run, and it was in the same town that the Unabomber had his little cabin, or at least in the same state.
The same state.
Yeah. Now, FBI apparently at one point really believed that he was involved, so much so that they asked him for a DNA test. And he actually agreed, but as long as the US Marshals wouldn't auction off all of his stuff that they seized.
Interesting.
In the horrible bureaucracy of the government, the Marshals didn't care. So they auctioned off all of his stuff. And then obviously he denied giving his DNA. They never had enough evidence to actually force it, but he was one of their top suspects.
They had a couple smaller ones that they didn't really mention.
But yeah, that's one of the reasons because they connected that other murder to the Tylenol murders.
There were a couple through the years that were copycat Tylenol
Yeah.
murders in New York as well.
This one actually preceded the Chicago Tylenol murders by a few months, but it was only one death. And I don't think they officially connected it until after the Tylenol murders.
That makes sense.
But that's why they thought it was him because he has relatives in Chicago and spent time in Chicago. And he had the cabin near the place where the first death happened. He's not my favorite suspect in this. I still think James Lewis is the best.
The guy doesn't have two brain cells to rub together.
I think he's pretty smart in the fact that he plays off the whole Tylenol murders. I just don't think he realized they wouldn't care about his book at that point and just want to talk about the Tylenol murders.
That's fair.
But yeah, those two are probably my two favorites out of all of them.
I agree with that. Still think Ted Kaczynski's a bit of a stretch.
It is, but he's almost got those connections where it almost believes that is plausible.
It just doesn't seem like his methodology.
Technically, serial killers have been known to change methodologies and MOs. It's rare, but it has happened.
It's true.
I'd say James Lewis is still probably my top.
I don't know. So, this isn't entirely the end of the case. Although we don't have an answer on who actually put the cyanide in the Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson changed how medication is bottled and sealed. They have seals over the top, plastic over the cap, and a cotton ball in the bottle to prevent any tampering. The government also passed what is known as the Tylenol bill, making it federally illegal to tamper with medication. Johnson & Johnson were also sued by the families, and instead of fighting it, they settled for an undisclosed amount of money out of court.
Again, this is exactly how you do it. I don't agree with the whole suing them part. I don't think at the time they could have done anything to prevent it.
I think they were sued for not having these safety procedures already in place. And back then, nobody thought this was ever going to happen.
And that's the thing is nobody had these safety measures in place. They actually created all these. And then other medication companies followed them, obviously. And they very much were the whole reason why the Tylenol bill got passed. They lobbied hard for that and spent a lot of money to make sure that it did get passed.
They did. They are the entire reason why now, frankly, it's difficult to get into medication. But that's a good thing. You want it to be difficult.
Oh, yeah. It honestly, the fact that they spent a whole lot of money doing this to save people is just remarkable. And on top of everything that they lost, the lawsuits, kudos for them for just settling, even though honestly, I don't think they should have been sued in the first place.
I was watching a news report or an interview. The person speaking said, "We chose to settle because we knew that they deserved something out of it. We probably should have been watching for safety back then, and we weren't."
Yeah. I don't blame them for that. Nobody was doing it. And honestly, if Advil or Aleve or whatever other companies there are, they were the top market, we could be talking about the Advil murders.
Exactly. Frankly, I don't know if they would have responded to anything like this. Probably not.
Some people think it was Big Advil who did this to get market share back.
They handled it so well that I don't hesitate to take Tylenol. I take other things, frankly, because I think it works better, but I'm not scared to take Tylenol. I'm not worried that I'm going to die.
I personally take the Tylenol Advil dual stuff, which is really freaking good product. But it just, I don't agree with suing them because, like I said, it could have been any company, but it's good that they at least gave them something. No telling what they actually did. Obviously, it was enough for the family to drop the lawsuit and accept the settlement.
I agree that they deserved something because obviously they went through hell.
Yeah. But then you talk about at that point, whose responsibility is it? Because yes, they deserve something. Is it Tylenol? Is it the stores that sold the Tylenol? Is it the government for not having these protections in place beforehand? It leads much deeper conversation of who is actually responsible here. Obviously, the person who did it, but you can't exactly sue a ghost.
It's
Oh,
true. You could try. I don't know how well it's going to go for you. Probably not the greatest, but you could give it a shot.
yeah. The way that Johnson& Johnson actually responded to all this is just amazing. And like I said, I don't think you would see that today.
It's why they're a trusted brand now. They're still trusted to this day. Tylenol is still a trusted brand. Nobody's scared to take it.
They got other shady practices that I don't agree with, but with the Tylenol thing, they did a good job.
They
Uh,
did.
Definitely tell they're different companies these days, though.
True. Unfortunately, we may never know who was responsible for the 7 deaths that occurred in Chicago due to Tylenol tampering. But the next time you complain about your medicine being difficult to open, be thankful you can be sure it's safe to take. You may have to remember 2 or 3 directions to get it to open, but at least you can feel safe and assured that the medication in the bottle you bought is the medication you paid for. Thank you for joining us on this journey through all things mysterious. Your engagement is what makes this so rewarding. If you've enjoyed uncovering these mysteries with us, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and following us on your favorite listening platform. For more intriguing content and ways to stay connected, don't forget to check us out on our links in the description below. Your involvement is the key to unlocking more thrilling mysteries.
As always, we keep you guessing.